Hi and welcome. My name is Tolan and I'm the co-founder of Productivity Me. In this video, we're going to look at the status bar and we're going to examine the 4 different components of the status bar, as well as how you can turn on certain items like summing your selection or averaging your selection. We'll look at different features and how you can think about using the status bar within Microsoft Excel. So if you're interested in that, join us in this video. All right, in this video, we're going to be using the exercise file 02.06. If you want to follow along and use the same spreadsheet that we're using, then you can download a copy of this file by going to the descriptions portion of this video on YouTube, going and selecting Show More. Once you've selected Show More, you can click the link to this file and download the file through Google Drive. Okay, so let's get started. Right, so we've talked about the different components of the Excel interface, things like the Quick Access Toolbar, the Excel ribbon, the idea of the formula bar. We have our active worksheets here and our individual worksheets here. And then below that, we have what's called the status bar. In Microsoft Excel 2013, that's going to be this kind of green strip here with white text. And there are generally 4 components to the status bar. The first component here is where the status bar gets its name. It's going to show you the status of the current document. Now, a lot of times it's going to say ready, which means that it's ready to input new data. So if I were to say type data here, then it would be ready. Now, if you click inside Excel and you double click, it's going to change its status to edit mode. And this means that you're editing the contents of an existing cell. So the 2 kind of most common statuses that you'll probably see is that of either ready, or if you were in a specific cell or a group of cells, it would be edit. You also see things like if you have a large Excel file, large Excel workbook with lots of different data points, you might see something like saving or different options. Now, the second component of the status bar is going to be that the individual quick status here, which is going to show you things like whether or not you have macros running. If you have caps lock, you might see that come on, or if you have num lock, that might show up here. So then over here, we have the 3 different most common views for Microsoft Excel. We'll talk about each of these views at greater length in a later video in this course, but the first view is what we're using now as normal. Then you have things like page layout view, which we'll discuss after we get out of edit mode. This is page layout view. This is what's called page break view. And then we have this individual slider or this zoom bar, and you can either click it, and depending on what mode you're in, we'll go back to our first cell. We can zoom in or we can zoom out. We could drag this and zoom out 1 increment at a time. Or the 4th individual component here, we can click on this zoom and we can say fit to our selection, or maybe we want to zoom to 100%. You can hit OK, and it would change the individual zooming. So again, we have the individual status here of ready or might be edit. We have the idea of the quick status for things like macros and perhaps caps lock. We have these 3 different views, and then we have the zoom slide bar, which is shown here. And of course, in order to use the sidebar, you have to be in ready mode. So the second piece of this lesson is how to modify the quick access, or not the quick access toolbar, but rather the status bar. You would modify the status bar by going to the section that you want to modify. You would right click with your mouse and you'll see individual options. So if you want to customize the status bar, you can say show your cell mode, the things like signatures. Before we had a check here, so if and when we put caps lock on, it will show. However, if we were to turn this off, then I currently have caps lock on. You don't know. I don't have it on, off, off. So again, you can achieve this by right clicking and then selecting which individual items you want to be displayed. There's lots of kind of different options that you might want to play around with. For example, we could turn off the level of zoom and the zoom slider, and that would no longer appear here on the right portion of our status bar. I generally keep those checked because I find it useful to have them. All right, the second kind of option here is if you select a series of data. So we selected this just by clicking on this first cell in our range and then holding down the shift key and left clicking. Again, that's something we'll discuss how to make a selection in a later video, but in case you want to follow along, you select this first cell, you hold the shift key and then left click. But you'll notice that we have things like, well, what is the average value of these 4 different regions? The average value in this case was $147,597. Now, there are 4 individual items counted in this specific range or in this specific selection, and the sum of these 4 values is about 590,000. Now, the way that we got these is by default, Microsoft Excel will display or not display certain values. You can change what values are displayed here on your status bar by scrolling over one of those values and then right-clicking with your mouse. Now, again, you get the same menu that we had before of customizing the status bar, but you can have things like, well, maybe I also want to show the minimum or the maximum. So if we were to do that, then when we have a selection, so let's again make this selection by clicking in this first cell, holding the shift key, and then left clicking with our mouse. Now, not only do we have the average and the count and the sum, but we also have the individual values of min. So what is the minimum value, the smallest value in this range? Well, it happens to be 123,000. And what about the maximum value? Well, in this case, the maximum value is here in the west region, which is 175,000. But if we were to select a different range, so let's select this range here from cell C3 to F3. When we select this range, you now, again, have a different average, a different count, a different minimum, which in this case is the negative $150,000 in sales. And then you have a different sum. So these individual icons down here will depend on the range that you selected and will change accordingly. You can change and modify which ones are displayed by right-clicking on the status bar and then either checking or, in this case, unchecking individual items. You could also have a specific thing that you do. So you may have time or you may take interest in looking at these different options and playing around with it, seeing what the different customization choices are for your status bar. But generally, by default, you'd have something like this, which is, it will show your quick status, your macros, maybe your caps lock icons. Then you'll have these individual different views, which we looked at, and then you'll have your zoom bar as well as your manual zoom, which you can set the selection to something like 100%. Okay, that covers our brief discussion around the status bar. In the next video, we're going to look at how to navigate within worksheets and workbooks within Microsoft Excel, both using the mouse and also the keyboard. So if you're interested in that type of lesson, join us in the next video and we'll get started. All right, see you again soon, and as always, thanks for watching.